Welcome to the Desert Sanctuary with Carl and Laura Forehand.
Often when we have doubts about religion or simply want to ask questions, it can feel like we are wandering out into the desert.
We would like to invite you to join our sanctuary, the Desert Sanctuary.
We've tried to pick guests that would resonate with and challenge us and our fellow seekers here in the desert.
We believe that a key to the journey is to keep asking good questions, and we believe that all stories are sacred.
Our hope is that you will find life and healing for your body and mind, and that you will be able to be where you are and be who you are.
And now, here is our show. Hi, welcome to the Desert Sanctuary podcast. I'm Laura Forehand. I'm here with Carl Forehand, and we're going to continue with our Good Questions podcast series, or think of these as the questions we asked or we may ask during
May still be asking
during our deconstruction journey. So before we dive in, however, just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware that our course, Evolving from Religious Trauma, is available on Carl's YouTube channel. Go ahead and say what that is again.
So it's just Carl Forehand, with Carl with a K and forehand like in tennis.
Mm-hmm. And you can also find the series on our website, desertsanctuary.org. So
Also every podcast episode should have a link or a video link in the show notes for that podcast. It's all over the place. If you look around in our stuff, you'll probably find it.
Yeah, for sure. So we've already done one question. And so today we have question number 2 that you wrote a blog about. And so kind of wanted to get on here and discuss it. And the question is, why didn't God get rid of Satan? Or how about God not create him at all in the first place? So, and I think those are like really good questions to ask. So I guess enlighten us, why didn't God get rid of Satan, or why did he even create Satan in the first place?
Yeah, I was trying to think of a good example, and maybe this is not even extreme enough, but let's say I created a company, and I hired employees for that company, but I knew they were going to fail. I knew they couldn't do this job that I hired them for. The company was going to fold, but I would blame it on them, and I would do something extreme like kill all of them or drown them or something like that. That's very literally how the book of Genesis plays out.
Right.
And that's supposed to be our foundation for everything that says who we are and whatever. But, these questions are always in the back of our mind, but it's just really extreme when you think about it, and it seems destined to fail. It seems all riddled with trouble. But I believe this is one of the questions you've got to ask. If, in a couple of questions, we're going to talk about something similar, but, if I'm going to worship God and follow him and follow his ways, he should have done a better job. When we get into the word and in the Bible and so on, we'll talk about the same thing again. If Jesus was the word, then he should be the communication should be very good.
Right.
It's like biblical. It's like, God communicating with us, and it should have been better. So I wrote, growing up, I assumed that everyone had the same beliefs as I did. When you live in the Bible Belt, we often cultivate the assumption of unity among our beliefs, and we ignore and mistreat those that disagree with us because they're obviously crazy or something. When I attended an independent fundamentalist Baptist church and later a Southern Baptist church, one of the key cornerstones of our belief was belief in eternal conscious torment or hell and a real being called Satan or the devil. A younger old lady queried me recently about the evolving beliefs. I'm not sure what that means. A younger old lady. I must have mistyped something there. But a lady queried me and asked me about my evolving beliefs by saying, so if you don't believe in hell or the devil, then none of the rest of it makes much sense. And I'm like, well, kind of, yeah. I mean, yeah. So,
Yeah.
but you got to deal with that. I don't have to deal with that because I already kind of believe that.
So I'm going to stop you there though. So explain to me, if you don't believe in hell or the devil, then how does the rest of it not make sense? Because here's my thing. I grew up in the Lutheran denomination, and I'll be honest with you, like we were never encouraged to bring our Bibles to church. Um, it was very dry. There was no creating a relationship with God, speak, we didn't hear that. And I really, to be honest with you, don't remember hearing a whole lot about the devil or hell.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not saying it could have just been that in my young years, I just didn't pay attention because it was very dry and boring. So maybe I just was thinking about other things. Possibly the brunch my mom was going to make when we got home from church because it was
Yeah.
always delicious, or going
Yeah.
to see my grandparents. But what does that mean? If you don't believe in hell or the devil, then none of the rest of it makes sense.
Yeah. And I said I could agree more with her. Um, when when I ask honest questions about Satan, the devil, and so on, many of my other beliefs don't have the same conviction as before. In your mainline denomination, they did talk about it, but it wasn't as often, it wasn't as pronounced,
Right.
and that fear element wasn't as strong.
Mm-hmm.
In the fundamentalist type of religions, they just get stronger with it because they know if you have that fear element, uh, without the fear element, it's much harder to sell the other doctrines of the church.
Mm.
Um, I'm we're not doing an in-depth study of hell or Satan here because others have done that, but there are some statements that we wrote in the blog that are important
Mm-hmm.
to understand. But I think her point was, you know, I do all this other stuff because I'm afraid of going to hell.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
so if I worship God because I fear him. I, you know, adopt your salvation message because I don't want to go to hell.
Mm.
And I'm afraid of Satan and what he's going to do to me. And I want to worship the devil. I want to be on the right side. I want God to be on my side. And so the fear, just like if you're selling life insurance or whether you're selling religion, fear is the sell. It's what whets the appetite.
Right.
It's what causes you to want to buy what they're selling.
So basically, it kind of almost shakes the foundation, because if you don't believe in Satan or hell, then what's the purpose of worshiping God? Or,
And even sometimes they substitute for hell the Russians or satanic
mm,
panic.
true.
All of those things that just say, our organization is going along good here. And Billy Graham started doing that, and
Mm,
Billy Sunday, and all those preachers
mm-hmm.
along the way just realized if we can get real strong and scare the crap out of these guys,
Mm-hmm.
then they'll respond better to our invitations. And we're
Right.
going to get more follow through, and people are going to be afraid to leave, which most of us were,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you talked about, your mainline denomination didn't push that fear element of it, but they still believed in hell and they
Mm,
believed in
mm-hmm.
a consequence there.
Sure.
Um, but I remember when coming out of deconstruction, when you were concerned about that, right?
Mm,
Am I going to go to hell or what's
yeah.
going to go on? And
Right.
maybe that all came later when you were in my denomination.
I think it did, but to be fair, like you said, I'm sure that the concept of hell was talked about. I was just young enough and probably bored enough in church that I just didn't pay attention to it. But
Yeah.
but I do remember, like, speaking of, like, just the fear tactics. I mean, the prayer we would pray before we went to bed every night. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to
Terrible
take.
prayer for kids too.
Yeah, right. So my sisters and I still talk about how was so traumatizing,
Yeah.
because how are you supposed to fall asleep after you are just like talking about, well, I could die while I sleep, so there was, yeah. And then pray the Lord my soul to keep, I mean, I guess if you want to infer on that, it's like, I pray that I don't go to hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even aside from how denominations misuse or use hell and so on, there's still a question further back there. There's a question of, okay, well, God has foreknowledge. That's what we were always taught.
Mm-hmm.
He knows what's going to happen.
Right.
So he knew his plan wasn't going to work. He created us. He put the system in place, put an adversary there to make us get off track, or his track, whatever that was. Then he lied in the garden, told them they wouldn't die, or they would die, and they didn't die. And why couldn't he have just got rid of Satan instead of drowning millions of people later?
Right.
Why couldn't he fix the system? That's what I want to ask the churches. Why can't you fix the system? I'm not asking you to have a certain style of worship, but let's fix the system that doesn't work.
Right.
And that's what I would ask God. But I wrote down some summary statements about, what are some of the key elements in the discussion about hell and Satan and so on. Jesus his only reference was to a place called Gehenna, which is the garbage dump outside of Jerusalem. So you can just think of a hill where you dump your garbage over and they constantly burn it. The fire's always burning, the worm never dies, and all that stuff. But that is Gehenna, which is now a park outside of Jerusalem. It's grassy and trees, and it's not a garbage dump anymore. But that's Gehenna, and that's what Jesus referred to. Jewish people refer to the place of the dead, and things like that. They have other words for hell or for the afterlife or whatever.
Right.
Jesus referred to Satan, who was a fictional character at the time known as the accuser. You think about people on stage, the villain, the accuser, the guy that's always causing trouble. That's Satan. So that was the character at the time that Jesus said that, and he said it in Arabic, not in Greek. So, we assume that he wasn't talking about some eternal being, but you got to make up your mind on that.
Yeah.
Eternal conscious torment, which is the type of hell preached in where we're eternally consciously tormented.
Right.
Goes against God's nature, according to Jesus' example. The example Jesus gave, if you want to go with the Bible narrative, goes against eternal conscious torment. He's like, forgive your enemies, love your neighbor, treat people like you want to be treated, not, overtly punish people way overboard for things they do. It's not retributive, it's restorative. So the Church of Satan and the satanic temple do not believe in a literal being called Satan. Neither one of them.
Right.
They are essentially political action groups, and they're a pushback against religion, and they're political against things that they see as unfair and not just and not good.
Right.
And so neither one of them believe in a literal being. The main people that believe in Satan are Christians.
Right.
Writers like Dante from the Middle Ages likely influenced our ideas of devil and hell more than our holy books. So it wasn't we didn't always think this way. There were 6 schools of thought in the 1st and 2nd century, and the minority views were of an eternal conscious torment. It was later when we get this idea and this picture of a pointy-headed devil, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The bottom line for hell and Satan is that the fear tactic works well to keep people under control.
Right.
And it's dependent and keeps it dependent on the church's alleged protection. So there's this thing you should be afraid of. We'll protect you from it.
Mm,
And so all you have is our word, that we're, this thing that we're telling you should be afraid of, but it's no problem if you're with us.
yeah.
It's a scam. It's a snake oil,
Yeah,
uh, whatever, tap dance. It's
it
kind
really
of funny if you
is.
think about it, but it's not.
You're right.
So my big question during deconstruction was slightly different than that, though. I was leaning away from the idea that those things were real, and I was inclined toward better questions that were lurking in the shadow. Like in a way they're beyond just thinking about whether the devil's real or whether
Hmm.
hell's real. It's why did God create a broken system?
Right.
Why would he do that? He's supposedly perfect,
Perfect, right.
and everything he does has meaning and purpose, and it's good and it's restorative and all those things. But it's not. I mean, the system's broke. It was created broken because he created us. He knew how we were going to act. He knew what we were going to do, and we were going to fail his system.
And that goes back to question number one. I mean, is that really a good father
Right.
that would purposefully try to trip up? It's either that or he's not as powerful
He
of a
just,
being
yeah, he's not able
as
or he doesn't
right,
know. Yeah.
right, right.
And then why did he create an adversary to lead us down the wrong path? You can say free will and he's testing us and all that, but that's
But
not.
again, goes back to your question number one.
Yeah.
Like we didn't purposefully try to entrap our own children and try to get them to mess up and or dangle a carrot that would lead them down the wrong path.
Yeah. They'll have enough challenges just with life
Right.
and navigating regular things without having to, um, go through this broken system that eventually, originally damns them
Mm-hmm.
and it's got a lot of problems. We don't have time to get into all those, but
Right.
um, the Westminster Catechism, written in the 1600s, says man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. This goal of communion would have been much more achievable, and so much pain could have been avoided if there wasn't an adversary that God seemed to have envisioned would steer us off the path.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we're created to enjoy God forever.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a good thing,
Right.
and seemed like that was what they're doing in the garden before God gives them a rule that they can't keep
Mm-hmm.
and tricks them into not doing it, you know, with the snake and
Mm-hmm.
so on. So when we look closely at history, it's pretty easy to see the ideas we have today of how doctrines of hell and Satan evolved because of religion. Like any other sales organization needs fear, and we mentioned that before, needs fear so that they can control the narrative and in many cases control what we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to manipulate someone when they're afraid,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. I know it is me.
So I said, was there someone above God that made him introduce the adversary?
Mm.
Is there someone else we need to talk to? I know all the arguments for free will, but they fall apart when we consider all the havoc that this character either caused or was blamed for throughout the ages. It's okay when we're talking about minor things, but there's no redemption or growth effects from many of the atrocities we now face.
Mm.
According to the narrative, all of that evil comes from the same root. So why didn't God pull it out from the root? Or why doesn't he do it now?
Right.
What's he waiting for?
Right. Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, it serves no benefit to make excuses for God, but that is what most of us do with this question. We'll assume we cannot understand God, which is true, but we also assume to understand him very well when we make assumptions or theology
Mm-hmm.
about his intentions.
Right.
Right? Does that make
Yep. Oh
sense?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to, again, what we were talking about when, if 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 there's a leader out there, or a deity that's above all others, and you have to continually make excuses for their bad behavior,
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to question their leadership or their deity.
Mm-hmm. Or their goodness, just their
Right.
basic goodness. And then we not only have to make excuses for their bad behavior, but we have to make assumptions about their good intentions
Mm,
because it's not very obvious,
right,
right?
right.
We don't see it, and I'm
Well,
sure
and our brains want to
want to make it
make
true.
make
Yeah.
things make sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our brains want to do. They want to find reason, and they want things to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I wrote a lot in this
Mm-hmm.
in this blog, but um, we think, I'm not against challenges that make us stronger, but the terrorism of hell and Satan myths are destructive, and they cause us to go down too many errant paths that harm us. When I finally thought about this question soberly, it did tear away at the foundations of most of the things I formerly believed. The girl was right.
Mm-hmm.
My friend, yeah, I said my friend was right, and that terrified her. But her angst was because she didn't know what was on the other side of the discovery. We feel like we're better morally because we've moved through this area of deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
We are better at doing good things because we're not constantly responding to our fears and looking for demons under every rock. We don't live in fear of the afterlife, mostly because we now understand that no one knows for sure about that supposition or
Right.
proposition. We have purpose, meaning, and practices that help us evolve to new levels of consciousness, and we don't spend our waking hours contemplating the myths of Dante and church leaders.
And I want to echo that, because I think that is so true. Like, when we were inside of organized religion, and probably for the first 5 years of our deconstruction, I mean, I really still wrestled a lot with death, and
Mm-hmm.
and especially inside of organized religion, because I thought, I mean, the rules were constantly changing in our particular denomination, and so what was okay one day might send me to hell the next day. And even though, I know JD kind of jokes about this, once saved, always saved. That was
Mm-hmm.
part of our
Yeah.
denomination as well. But still, I mean, because they dangle that, over you so often, you always second guess yourself. Am I really saved? Am I really saved? I mean, how many like people, when you were a pastor, did we have repeatedly, like, at least, I'm not saying every week, but, let's say every other month, what was that called, where they would
Rededication.
rededication. Yeah, they would
Mm-hmm.
rededicate,
Yeah.
themselves to the Lord. And it's like, why did they feel like they had to do that? Because, like, I mean, if you're once saved, always saved, then why would that even
Yeah.
matter? But since going through deconstruction, I mean, there's much more of a peace. I'm not looking to die. I have too much in my life that I want to enjoy my grandkids, my kids, our relationship, just all those things, that I get so much joy from, that I'm not looking to. But I also am like, I don't fear death anymore, because that's not such a looming thing of, are you sure you're right with God?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure you have all your ducks in a row,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I just wanted to echo that, because I think for me, it it has been a good transition, to where I just feel like there'll be some day when I'm just part of the universe again. Like, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
we are already part of the universe, right? What we do matters in this life, but when we're dead and gone, I feel like we still live on. We live on in our children and our grandchildren, and maybe someday our great grandchildren. We live on in the relationships and the connections that we've had, Um, yeah. So anyway, I didn't mean to take over there, but
That's good.
that just really kind of hit me.
So if you're wondering, if you're out there and you're listening to this and wondering, what would help you in the Bible in dealing with the cultivated fear that church leaders have stoked for hundreds of years, I would refer you and your conscience to the over 300 encouragements in that book to not fear, to fear not. It's, I think
Mhm.
about once every day you could find a verse. It's 360 or something
Yeah.
like that. The agents of fear are not the demons. They are the narcissistic, smooth talking leaders you have elected and hired to keep you informed about what you should fear.
Hmm.
So
Right.
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They're going to tell you what you should fear.
Hmm.
It's going to stoke your fear. It's going to make you more dependent upon them. A little research can help you understand what you should actually be afraid of. But the thousand-year-old myths of literature and history are persistent because they get results for the perpetrators of them.
And I want to like speak to what you said about the narcissists, smooth talking leaders that you've elected and hired to keep the information about what you should fear. Because, I mean, the first thing I thought about was when you know, were behind the pulpit at our last church and you talked about baking the cake for the gay couple.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, that wasn't what we quote unquote believed. I'm using air quotes, right? I mean, it is what our hearts, you and I, our hearts believed. Like we were already deconstructing from a lot of our beliefs, but I tell you what, that did not sit well with some in the congregation.
Especially the ex-pastor
The
who was
narcissistic
ex-pastor
ex-pastor that was sitting in the congregation.
really
And
like being afraid of
yep,
everything.
yep.
So
And so
yeah.
and he began to, I think that not only did he talk to you, but I believe probably started talking to people in our church. And well, if we start believing that, then we're
Yeah.
sliding down a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So
Yes, we're back to the question, why didn't God do something about it? Um, he wrote, after killing his son to atone for the work of the accuser, he didn't do much at all to prevent the travesties that will in reality come from the frightened members of religious communities and continue after the sacrifice. I point you to Hitler's army that was all Christian, or mostly all Christian, 90 something percent Catholic and Protestant. Those people were afraid of something else, something that their leaders had ginned up in them. And now that's where they found themselves. Someone has to answer for the worldwide devastation that's evolved from our fearfulness that the other is always the devil and God is on our side. So the victims and survivors of global, regional, and local tragedies continue to ask the question, why didn't God stop it? Why doesn't he stop it now? Meanwhile, the leaders who have stoked our fear and caused much of the calamity assure us it's all reasonable suffering to strengthen us and be a part of God's plan. And
which we still don't know what God's plan is,
every
right?
time they do that, they go a little bit further
Yeah.
and justify worse and worse things,
Right.
including war, including rape, and all of those things. So I said, are you starting to see how good questions provide much better information than answers to the answers to the questions don't come easy and create some temporary cognitive dissonance as we evolve and devalue some of our old understandings and assumptions. So keep asking good questions.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like how it makes you feel or how it brings up a little bit of anxiety in you, it's going to.
Yeah. And then you can stop and ask yourself, you know, why you're feeling that anxiety, what might be causing you to feel that anxiety.
Where's it
Those
come
are
from?
all, yeah, those are that goes back to what we've said so many times on this podcast about getting to know your true authentic self and asking yourself those questions. Why am I still do that. We were just having a conversation before we recorded about, just some anxiety and control issues that I have. And, why, instead of beating myself up anymore with those, why are you feeling that way? It's a chance for me to go, you know, where is that coming from?
Mhm.
Like there's a valid reason that you are feeling that uncomfortableness, and so sit with yourself to try to
Yeah.
figure out why. And it's okay if you can't figure it out right away.
Yeah.
But like you said, keep asking those good questions and trying to determine where where that anxiety is coming from.
Yeah.
It's there for a reason. It's kind of like when we have those uh trauma responses. We have those trauma responses because we've been through a traumatic experience. And there's like that's what your body should do,
Mhm.
is respond
Yeah.
that
And
way.
the anxiety from asking these good questions um, is not because you asked the question. It's because you asked a question that touched on something that's wrong,
Mhm.
that doesn't make sense.
Not sitting well
It's
with
not
you.
sitting well with you, and you're allowing yourself to feel that a little bit.
Right.
So, why didn't God do it? And the answers that come out of that, why didn't God just stop him? Why didn't God create a better system? The answer is either he couldn't, right, or he's not powerful enough, like you said, or he doesn't.
He's a narcissistic
He's,
asshole
yeah, he's
himself.
not really loving.
Right.
Um, or you can just ignore it all and go and make up your own assumptions, like we've done for a couple thousand years. Um, but those kind of questions need to be asked because um, we've all been through it. Everybody that's ever been to church has had that uneasiness, and we try to ask a question, but no one wants to answer it. Nobody even wants to ask the question
Mhm.
because then it it breaks up the foundation of our idols and our belief systems and the things that we've just hung on to because we inherited them from
Right.
somebody else.
Right. And I think that's another really good point that we need to sit with and just and acknowledge that we've inherited a lot of these things. And so it's not necessarily and I use air quotes, your fault for believing these things. It's just something that's been passed down. It's generational. But it's
Mhm.
kind of like we have talked to some podcast guests. I mean, we need to look at religious trauma as generational trauma.
Mhm.
I mean, we really do.
Yeah.